Donald Trump is not even back in the White House yet, and he's already talking about annexing Canada, buying Greenland, and snatching back the Panama Canal. Let's hear what Ben Hodges, a retired four-star general, has to say about these plans. Ben, welcome back to DW News.
Thank you for the privilege.
A lot to talk about, of course. Let's start with Greenland. Donald Trump isn't actually the first president who's kind of interested in this country, but how seriously should we take his approach to kind of even maybe use military force?
Well, of course, it's alarming to many people that he would speak like that about, not ruling out the use of force, especially when we're talking about the territory that belongs to a NATO ally, Denmark. I don't think anybody's arguing against the strategic importance of Greenland, both from a uh, with climate change, accessibility for shipping in the region, and access to strategic minerals. But there's ways to do that, and I think the the government in Greenland has made it clear they're open for business. They would welcome it. We already have a U.S. base there. Or if it's so important, then grow what you have on the base. The secret sauce of NATO has always been cohesion. Even though all the countries in NATO, we argue with each other all the time on different things, the cohesion of the alliance was the most important part of the guarantee. This kind of language, I think, damages that cohesion.
But should we take this even seriously that he says that he might use military force?
I think a good rule with President Trump is take everything seriously, but not always literally.
Talk a little bit more about that. What do you mean by that?
Well, if he said this, that means that he and his advisors and people that he listens to have thought about it. I mean, they will have had that conversation. If we're talking about Greenland, for example, the fact that he sent his son and a couple of other people out there, they flew there, you know, is kind of yeah, I'd say um, this is not something that he had while taking a walk somewhere. I mean, there's more to it. So that's what I mean by take it seriously. But the idea of force, I have to believe that this is Trump, the famous negotiator, by his own self-description, starts out by saying, "Yeah, it's so important. I won't rule out using force if we have to." I think it's extremely unlikely it would get to that, but it seems more likely now than I would have dreamed even a month ago. Um, and this will be a test, by the way, for the senior officer leadership in the U.S. military. I mean, I would want to see a legal review on this. An unprovoked attack on a NATO ally. Um, I would imagine and certainly hope that the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that the Joint Staff, that the Department of Defense, they would all be, and the Department of State would be saying, well, wait a minute, this is a NATO ally. I mean, there are implications, and hopefully this would be in order if it ever did come down that would never be obeyed.
But that's, I think, one big fear around the world. How reliable are these different levels in the future Trump administration?
Well, we're going to see. I think today is the confirmation hearing for Mr. Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense nominee. Um, and I think the Trump team they've made it clear that loyalty is an extremely important thing for them. So that's what I mean. It could be a test. Now, again, hopefully I'm wrong, and there's going to be a lot of really talented, mature, sensible people in the administration. They're not going to all be crazy. And so what I would expect and hope is that the serious people will help moderate or temper some of these things so that we protect America's interests, which means strong allies.
Talking about Mr. Hegseth, the possible future defense minister, he said that he doesn't want women soldiers in combat. I mean, you're an experienced general. What would this mean for the force of the U.S. Army?
Well, there's two or three problems with what he has said. First of all, there's a practical aspect to this that there are not enough young men in America that are stepping forward to meet all the requirements. And fortunately, there are lots of women that have said, "I'll serve, I'll do that." So we have a practical requirement for people that So if you start going back in time and saying, yes, we need women to do certain things, but you can't do this, this, and this, I think that damages recruiting. Um, and it overall damages the force because my experience has been that women, first of all, they work like dogs because they always feel like they have something to prove. You have far less discipline problems with female soldiers. And frankly, there's only a tiny percentage of them actually want to be in the infantry, which is what Mr. Hegseth is really alluding to. No women in combat means women can't do the infantry tasks. Actually, the ones that pass all the standards, they can do it. But it's such a tiny number that yet that becomes the focal point. And in modern warfare, this is not like the First World War where only the people on the front lines were involved in the fighting. Everybody could end up being in a convoy that's attacked or where you have to pull somebody out of a burning vehicle. I mean, that's a anachronistic way to look at things that, no women at the front line because there is no front line anymore. And I tell you what, it's really a disservice to the thousands of women who have served with valor and distinction in combat in Iraq, in Afghanistan, at sea, in the air, doing all these different things. So I this look that's catering to a particular audience, and in the long run, it would only damage the readiness of the U.S. military. Now, if anybody is lowering standards in order to get more women in, then shame on us. That's unacceptable, and I think most women would prefer to know that they had to meet the standard.
I would like to circle back to Donald Trump's announcement one more time. He also was talking about Canada, of course, and the Panama Channel. Is this also just like talk and no action, or how should the world deal with these announcements?
I don't understand why um, he does this unless there is some sort of great power, 19th century or 18th century view of the world. That, here on the map on my wall, when you look at, North America, Canada, Greenland, and Panama here, is that, this should be our sphere. Well, of course, that would be music to the ears of people in the Kremlin and in Beijing if the American government now likes the idea of this is all ours, you can have your bit. And that obviously that's a short-sighted approach too, because of how we depend on, you can't survive with just your own little piece of the world. Now but despite the craziness of the announcements, if you get past that, there is merit in some of what he has said. Canada has enormous resources. It's a wealthy country, but yet it does precious little in terms of defense. I mean, I was just in Canada a few weeks ago. They are complaining up there that, the government has not invested in defense. And so, there are Americans, and not just Mr. Trump, that say Canada has benefited from the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Navy, and having the U.S. as a neighbor, even though Canada has a critical Atlantic coast, a critical Pacific coast, and obviously being one of the two largest Arctic countries in the world. So um, the idea of making it the 51st state, I mean, this sounds kind of like classic Trump bluster, but I think it's extremely unhelpful. Why would you pick a fight with a neighbor that's like one of your biggest trading partners and has been a very good ally, even if they don't invest enough? I mean, I don't get that. Panama, there's a absence of facts in the description of what's going on. Yes, there are Chinese companies involved in operating ports around the world, and that's something that should be watched very closely. It should be prevented as much as possible because I have always worried about that. But if you go to the port of Hamburg, of course, you've got Costco operates much of the port of Hamburg.
Right.
That's a concern. But, to justify, this is ours, we built it, so we're going to take it back. I think this is unnecessary and extremely unhelpful.
Ben, we have been talking so often about Ukraine and what possible Donald Trump return might mean for the country. Now we are just like days ahead of January 20th when Donald Trump is signed in as the next president. He said that he will end the war on day one. What do we have to expect on January 20th and the days after?
Well, I watch what General Kellogg says. General Kellogg is his envoy to this, and General Kellogg just the other day said this: you need to go ahead and assume at least 100 days, and I think even 100 days is unlikely. But um, what two things that General Kellogg has said that encouraged me were, number one, you cannot trust Russia. That's a good start point for any negotiations with the Kremlin, is you can't trust them. So that means there will have to be very strong, compelling compliance protocols in place to make sure that Russia lives up to what it says it will do, because it never did that after Minsk I or Minsk II or any other time. The other thing he said, which I liked hearing, was that the sovereignty of Ukraine was extremely important. And so that means, of course, Crimea. So a recognition by the Trump administration that sovereignty of Ukraine is important, I like that. What the part I didn't like was when he said that, maybe, 20 years from now, Ukraine can join NATO. Why would you go into negotiations starting off already giving that up? I think that was not a good negotiating tactic, and it's also a terrible policy idea. The big difference now is I think Trump and his team are realizing that Putin is much weaker now than he was even a year ago. Um, Not just the hundreds of thousands of casualties, their failure to get more of Ukraine than the 20% they have now. The defense industry of Russia is in the toilet. The economy is in bad shape. So Putin is a lot weaker. And then his dear friend Bashar al-Assad just collapsed and is living in an apartment somewhere in Moscow now. Russia did not even have the ability to save Assad while still fighting Ukraine. I think Trump's team sees this, and so maybe he's not so enamored with Vladimir Putin now like he was 8 years ago. He has the leverage of not only Putin's weakness, but Mr. Trump is inheriting an economy that is very strong. He's at the peak of his political power in the U.S., and he's got a lot of countries that are ready to follow U.S. leadership if he leads in a positive way, helping Ukraine. There's three things that the Biden administration did way, way, way too late, but nonetheless, they did it. That includes $2 billion worth of aid that still have not been delivered yet. Trump can let that keep going without saying anything. He can leave in place the lifting of restrictions on Ukraine's use of ATACMS, let that stay in place, and then these sanctions on Russian oil industry and the shadow fleet vessels, leave that in place. I mean, he starts off in a very powerful position.
But on the other hand, he's under a lot of pressure from his MAGA people, to prove that he ends this war on day one or whatever, takes major action.
I don't think that matters one bit. He's even already said, oh, it's going to take a little longer than expected. Just like he's also said, it's really hard to lower food prices. And I think that they are going to not worry a lot about that. They have a very, very challenging legislative schedule ahead because, when the sun goes down on January the 20th, he will already be a lame duck president. And the midterm elections, the election cycle starts in just a few months. And so with a very, very narrow majority that the Republicans have in the House of Representatives, he's going to have to work hard to get the domestic agenda things done that he really wants to do. And I just think, what was said on the campaign trail is not as relevant, at least when we're talking about Ukraine anymore. I hope he uses this leverage to take advantage of the situation for the interests of the United States and of Europe by helping Ukraine defeat Russia, because that will send such a powerful signal to the Chinese that we're serious, that we have political will and industrial capacity, and he could be the big winner here. But I think I really do think, I could be wrong, but I really do think that they're doing a reassessment of Russia, and that Putin is not the genius, the savvy guy, the winner that maybe Trump thought he was 4 years ago.
We just got like kind of a little bit of a glimpse what Trump is going to do again, like announcing all these things within minutes, every night, every morning in his new presidency. How should the West react to all these things he's going to say?
I like what I said earlier, that, and it was in a piece by Lawrence Friedman that I read today, where he says that most European countries are saying, okay, we're going to take him seriously, but not literally, and don't overreact. Be practical, pragmatic, because at the end of the day, America's business interests, economic interests depend on stability and security around the world and access. We get that from Europe. I mean, as well as having our biggest trading partner being the continent of Europe. So I think, Germany, for example, Germans are already, the government was already leaning into the possibility that Trump might be elected, and therefore, okay, well, let's be practical about things. You don't want to wake up on you don't want to wake up on January the 20th with an empty phone book, right? So, and I think also people are realizing that they can do a lot talking to the states, that the big companies that are in South Carolina, for example, BMW. So the governor of South Carolina, who's a Republican, a MAGA guy, has a real interest in making sure that BMW stays prosperous and employs thousands of South Carolinians. So I think German companies and the German government working with the different states will be a practical approach, particularly if there's a Trump policy that they don't like.
Ben, thank you so much, and I'm sure we talk soon again.
I hope so. Great to see you again, Ines.